Whakaloa whalahi atu kia motolo osi. Welcome to the Pacific. I'm Alice Lolohea.
Malo te maoli, I'm Johnson Aira, and coming up on the show, the difficulty in repatriating Pacific human remains.
A controversial push that could affect future elections in New Caledonia.
And behind the scenes with the Bender brothers.
When people come up to me, I'll be honest, I love it, eh?
But first, Anzac commemorations have been taking place across the region. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was in PNG with his counterpart, James Marape. They walked part of the Kokoda track together.
And Prime Minister Marape also said he'd be delighted for PNG citizens to serve in the ADF, with Australian Defence Minister Richard Marles recently floating the idea as a way of boosting recruitment.
But did you know many Pacific citizens have already served with the Anzacs, mainly during the major conflicts of the 20th century, but their contribution is often forgotten. And literary legend Mawalaivao Albert Wentz says, "We are what we remember."
So, we're taking a look at one of these old wartime tales from Niue, and we meet some current servicemen and women stationed in Townsville who have been inspired by these legacies.
A warning that the following story contains images and voices of deceased persons.
Growing up in Papua New Guinea, we didn't really celebrate Anzac Day, even though I hadn't heard about the military. It was all around me with the World War II relics within Rabaul.
Corporal Talita Stein moved to Australia from PNG when she was a child. She didn't plan on joining the military, but after losing her job during the pandemic, she wanted a new challenge. Corporal Stein says Anzac Day now takes on new meaning.
It's a lot different because I'm now in the Australian Defence Force and I feel a sense of pride putting on the uniform and serving with other members. It gave me the opportunity to actually sit and reflect on what our forefathers had done for us to be where we are today.
As we mark Anzac Day, I also think about my forefathers who were actually involved in the Second World War along the Kokoda tracks.
Colonel Boniface Aruma comes from a legacy of service. His father, Patrick Aruma, served in the ADF.
He joined in 1967 under the Australian Army and served for 24 years, and he was a signaller. Of course, my hero, and still remains my hero. Passed away in 2009.
There are many Indigenous and Pacific wartime stories, like the famed Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels, Papua New Guinean carriers who helped Aussie soldiers on the Kokoda Trail. The fierce fighters of the 28th Māori Battalion, wielding bayonets like taiaha. And these Indigenous and Torres Strait Island veterans who led the National Anzac Day March in 2017.
About time Indigenous soldiers got a bit of recognition. You know, we haven't had much in the past.
These stories were never forgotten by the soldiers or the communities they hailed from.
In Niue, everyone knows about it. It's celebrated. They're very proud of it. Family members are proud, and the island, everybody's connected because, you know, it's a smaller community compared to other islands.
Award-winning documentary maker Tuki Laumea is back with the online series Untold Pacific History. This season, they explore the story of the 150 Niue men who served in World War I.
When I grew up learning about Anzac, I knew in Flanders Fields, the poppies grow. I knew that poem off by heart. But I didn't know that we had our own compositions in Niue. We have songs that are written about the war. We have songs that document the history and talk about people and talk about a Māori battalion and Niue. And working on this documentary is it revived some of those like gems for me, and it gave me access to some of that lost kind of like history. Because I bet you all my cousins in my generation, we don't know those songs. Like, we did not grow up listening to that.
Lecky Jackson Burke leads this particular episode, walking the same footsteps his grandfather did as part of the 150.
For heaps of them, it would have been their first time outside of the island. And so when I think about that, I'm like, man, that's admirable. If that was me back in the days, I could not do what my great-grandpa did. Like, I just think about where my life is now. I would not be able to put everything on hold to go and fight in the war. That's a huge sacrifice. That's kind of the gold that the oldies have that we now need to extract and take from them before they pass on. Because if we lose that, then we lose bits of the story that are crucial to us.
You know, we'll always be what we are and we'll always have our culture, but those things are really important to remember, that You know, that's what our people stood for, the amazing things that so many Pacific people did, you know, throughout history. I think it's just important to acknowledge, and, you know, like their families are still around today, and those are stories that they treasure and hold.
In the last show, we checked in on the vote in Solomon Islands. Wow. Now the counting is finished. Caretaker Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare's Our Party leads with 15 seats, 11 seats still short of what's needed to govern. So there's still a lot of political lobbying going on in Honiara to secure the majority. Fresh after winning his constituency, Mr Sogavare spoke with Gina Kikea from Tavuli News. He says not everyone will be happy he's back in Parliament, particularly those critical of his pivot to China. He also took a swipe at the US, making an unsubstantiated claim of election interference against America.
First battle finished now, much to the disappointment of the Western world. Maybe we touch on that one first. There was big disappointment below the tower when the result come out, and you can see clearly there the military personnel that were standing there, shaking their head, when the result come out. There's this huge competition on our side, so there's something will break there. When you have everyone, you know, and the Prime Minister, same pattern in development. 2019. When them not come out the way they want them, right in course of happened in 2019. I'm seeing that can by him happen. Can also so you know, we will just have to step up security.
So there you go. Mr Sogavare seems confident his party will form a coalition government, but the main opposition bloc has about the same number of seats, so there's still very much more to play out yet.
Okay, there's been a lot of dialogue around repatriating remains to traditional owners in recent times. Indigenous spears taken by James Cook over 250 years ago have just been returned from England into the care of the La Perouse Aboriginal community. Here in Australia, institutions have been repatriating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander remains for over 30 years.
But what about the remains of Pacific Islanders in Australia? As Pacific reporter Hugo Hodge uncovered, there's nearly 1,500 Pacific ancestors in 13 institutions across the country.
A warning, this story contains the names and images of Pacific Island and First Nations Australian ancestors.
This is Nikolai Miklahul-McLeod Jr. He's on his way to the remote Rai Coast in Papua New Guinea. Nikolai is a direct descendant of the famous Russian scientist and explorer of the same name, who first came here over 150 years ago. Nikolai studied life here, and in 1877 he left with 16 human skulls, taken with consent according to his records.
Hello, my brothers! I'm really happy I'm here.
The Russian explorer is still remembered fondly here, and his namesake's arrival is cause for celebration. We've given Nikolai information on the whereabouts of those 16 skulls, which he's about to share with the elders of Bongu and Gorendu villages.
Have you heard of some of these ancestors' names before? Andan, Ibor, Kake, Panake?
Panake is from Komblum.
Panake from Gorendu.
Yes.
Okay.
I am ancestor of Peneki, and Peneki is a chief warrior. He's a fighter. I never know that the skull of my ancestor Peneki is at Sydney University in Australia.
Those 16 skulls from the Rai Coast, along with many others collected by the Russian explorer, ended up here at the University of Sydney in 1889. The University of Sydney declined to be interviewed for this story, but they said that they would review any requests for access or repatriation of the ancestral remains. This university is not alone. We reached out to historical institutions across Australia who confirmed that they still have Pacific Islander ancestral remains in their collections to this day. The Pacific made inquiries with Australia's 8 historic museums and discovered over 1,000 Pacific ancestors in their collections. The Australian Museum has the most, with nearly 400 ancestors, while the South Australian Museum, the National Museum of Australia, and Museums Victoria all have over 150. 5 of Australia's historic universities confirmed they hold Pacific remains, with nearly 300 at the University of Sydney.
A lot of these human remains either purchased, some were traded, and there were those that were just robbed and taken illegally, looting.
Teresi Vunidillo is a Fijian archaeologist who has worked with museums globally to repatriate ancestors. She says human remains were historically taken by pseudoscientists to justify racial inequality, and estimates there could be up to 100,000 Pacific ancestral remains in institutions around the world.
Because it all comes again to how you define a human remain or ancestral remain, because it's either you define it as a complete individual, it can also be identified as just the cranium or the skull or, the jawbone, teeth, the list goes on. A lot of international museums, they sometimes don't understand how we are so emotionally connected to these individuals. That kind of connection through spirituality, through our DNA, through our names, through our totems, it's something that continues forever.
Around the world, Western institutions have been trying to right the wrongs of the past. Australian museums have returned more than 2,700 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander remains. By comparison, repatriations from Australia to the Pacific rarely happen. Only 4 of the institutions we spoke to are working on Pacific repatriations.
I think it comes back to what purpose would those human remains do for those institutions today. If there's no use, then the right decision is for them to go back home.
But repatriation is often costly and complex. Institutions lack resources, cultural understanding, and even details about the origin of the remains. And for descendant communities, it's an emotional minefield.
This has been a big shock to us.
South Sea Islander community leader Clacy Fatnauna was shocked to discover that the Queensland Museum was holding on to 65 ancestors' remains.
I think I would have really liked the Queensland Museum to reach out to us, and instead of the other way around. It's dragged us back to the 1880s with regards to how our people were treated. We need both the financial, the pastoral care and the mental health support to be able to work through this.
Securing government funding for Pacific repatriations is a challenge. A spokesperson for the Department of the Arts said the Australian government only provides funding for the return of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander remains.
Australian institutions holding foreign ancestors are responsible for their care and decisions about their repatriation.
The Queensland Museum said it welcomes repatriation and it called for a national policy.
It does seem a mammoth task. It's one that needs to be done. These institutions have to act ethically.
A big challenge for Pacific communities is deciding what to do with the remains. Descendant communities don't always agree. A protracted legal dispute has broken out between 2 parties of Bannerman Islanders in Fiji over who are the rightful owners of a revered ancestor's remains stolen over 100 years ago, currently at the University of Melbourne.
The museum, I believe, should not be the final decision maker when it comes to that. They should be talking to village elders, they should be talking to community leaders so that they can come to a consensus.
The repatriation of 2 ancestors from the Australian Museum to Tonga in January has been viewed as a successful template for future repatriations.
Tongans, especially people from Ata, the Tongan Wur family, were able to inform how we could do this, and finding out how we can do this properly was part of the process, so that we can do that with the other ancestors we hold throughout the Pacific.
I know a lot of museums in Australia They often, asking for help in terms of knowledge or cultural protocols. These new relationships can be created, can be nurtured, can be strengthened.
Some have floated the idea of national resting places in Pacific Island countries for unidentifiable remains, something the Australian government is building in Canberra for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander remains.
Descendants can actually go there and pay their respects.
Back on the Rye coast, a heated discussion has broken out amongst the villagers.
6 of us, we have discussed and we all agree to bring back our skull for proper burial.
We feel very bad when we heard that our ancestors' skulls are in Sydney. As the Christian country, we want to get the skulls of our ancestors and bury them.
In a twist of fate, Nikolai Jr. finds himself in a similar situation. After his burial, Nikolai Sr.'s skull was exhumed and it ended up in a St. Petersburg museum.
I believe that his skull has served the good science and humanity, and it is time to put it in the ground, to bury it.
And since producing this story, the University of Sydney says it has commenced discussions with people on the Rye coast about repatriating remains. Okay, to New Caledonia now, where a controversial push to change the territory's electoral rolls has prompted widespread protests. The French Senate has endorsed rules that could see 25,000 extra voters included for future elections in New Caledonia. So, what exactly are these changes all about, and why are they proving so divisive? For 40 years, pro-French and pro-independence New Caledonians have lived side by side in relative peace. But in recent months, historic divisions have re-emerged. Around half of the capital Nouméa's population has been out in protest. On one side, supporters of the French government's push to amend voting laws. The other stands in opposition, objecting to the French government's conduct.
La Nouvelle-Calédonie est française parce qu'elle a choisi de rester française.
The territory held a third and final independence referendum in 2021, but the verdict to remain part of France was controversial, after calls to postpone the vote until after the pandemic led to a pro-independence boycott. Since then, there's been little consensus on the path forward, and now some say France is rushing through electoral changes. Right now, only those who were New Caledonian citizens prior to 1998 can vote in elections. A historic French concession acknowledging the influx of largely pro-French European migrants. The rules have meant around 25,000 residents, including some who have lived there their whole lives, can't vote. Long derided by loyalists, the rule has helped Kanaks, who make up nearly 50% of the population, establish significant political power. The proposed changes would instead give the vote to anyone living in New Caledonia for the decade prior to an election. The independence movement argues any alteration should be part of a wider agreement, including a path to a future vote on self-determination.
Le scrutin est ouvert.
But Paris is pressing on. The changes could become law in the coming months.
Adopté.
Lifting the stakes, an economic crisis is looming, as New Caledonia's vital nickel industry verges on collapse. There are also real fears of civil unrest as tensions escalate. Okay, let's unpack all of this. Joining me now is pro-independence activist and New Caledonian politician Patricia Gore. Bozu, Patricia, and thank you for joining the Pacific. Let's get straight into it. Now, we know many don't see the recent independence referendum as legitimate, and some say that the move to amend voting laws is rushed. But don't you think it's fair that people who have lived in New Caledonia for 26 years should be allowed to vote?
Who is saying no to that question? We're just saying that for us, people of the Pacific, things are going too fast. The time frame we are working on, we are talking on, is not the same which the French government is dealing with. It's not saying that I can't have my say. It's just saying that if you really care about New Caledonia, you are prepared to stay. Someone who just came because he wants to work, take benefit from New Caledonia and be gone in 3 years doesn't make sense. It's like, as you said, someone that's been living in here for 26 years. We can hear that, but we have to be also aware of what is happening around us.
Given the history of civil unrest in past decades, do you think New Caledonia is in danger of heading down that path again, especially with the protests that are happening at the moment?
Where there no hope in front of us, we will fight, we will struggle. We'll make sure you understand what we are talking about. Things can go wrong, and our past show that. But there's something with the people from the Pacific, is the way there is resilience. We are not prepared to sort of cry again.
Why are you still fighting for independence?
Because we're not independent yet. That's why. And I'm really thinking it's about time you succeed in decolonization. France. I'm not against the French people. I'm against the system. Let's be clear on that. So, yes, I'll still be there. I'll still be fighting for my rights. I'll be still struggling. But because I'm a woman, because I'm a Kanak, because I'm a mother.
One final question, Patricia. What do you hope the future holds for New Caledonia?
What do I hope? I really hope that New Caledonia, Kanaki Nouvelle-Calédonie, come to gain its sovereignty. It's really important. At one stage, there's a need of freedom. And knowing the ability of resilience of all the people from the South Pacific, I know will be there. It will take time. Sure, it will take time. But altogether, we'll be there.
That's all we have time for. Merci beaucoup, Patricia.
We like to end the show on a high and with a bit of a laugh.
So we're going to take you to Brisbane now, actually Goodna to be more specific, and we meet Tausanga, Swanee and J5, who are the three usos that make up the Brenda brothers.
The boys take us behind the scenes of their Bender Yarns podcast, which is a whole vibe, and they take us to some of their favourite spots in the hood.
We'll see you next week.
Ni samo there.
Nah, my dad was, is this making you money? Is this doing anything? Yeah. I showed him the YouTube. He's like, 30K. I was like, yeah, that's how much money we get. Such a lie. On the weekend, he was Sione. On the weekday, he was Sianing. Yeah, Sianing.
Hey, what's good, baby?
Hey, it's the Bender Bros here. It's your Susanga.
Hey, what's good, man? It's Swanee. And you know it's your boy, J5.
Hey, we just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that's been supporting us since the start, bro. Where we are now to where we were before. Bro, all thanks to you guys. So pretty much how Bender Yarn started, the podcast, we kind of blew up on TikTok a bit. We're like, all right, if we can capture that, put it on camera, and just be ourselves, maybe people will like it, and it did.
Yeah, guy. Have you heard of the Bender brothers? No. Can I rub your hand? Yeah, got out.
Now, usually there's three of us, but unfortunately J5 can't make it today.
but that's not going to stop us going through the hood, man.
100%, man. Hey, this is Guna. This is the main strip of Guna that everyone comes to. But there's a Samoa shop on the corner here. We'll go show you some love and get some stuff from there, bro. Hey, Usul, how are you, bro? Good, man, good. Hey, can I grab maybe like 6 lamb buns?
Very, really good.
Nah, good. Busy today. Just want to come show some love to you guys. We're from the hood. Say what's up to the camera. Say what's up to the camera.
How are you, boys?
Thank you, Usul. Much love to you, bro. Have a good one, bro.
That's me. I sing the camera crew and all that, so like, may as well come out and say what's up.
Appreciate it, eh? Much love, bro. Have a good one, bro. When people come up to me, I'll be honest, I love it, eh? I love it, man. But because I know that feeling, man. When I seen a well-known person growing up and they came and shook my hand, I was like, man, you're the man, bro.
Yeah, so feedback we get from listeners, I think they enjoy the laughs and the humour, but they also enjoy the deep chats that we do dive into, because sometimes the topics that we're on aren't really spoken about within friend groups.
There's him, her, and then there's people who like to identify
Them
as
and they.
them and they.
That's crazy
Which
to
I'm
me.
like,
That's
I'm
crazy
like,
to
I don't
me.
like to dive in because to me there's all Balangi terms.
Yeah.
There's all Balangi
Yeah,
things,
word,
and I'm
that's
not
word,
Balangi,
word.
so I don't like.
Yeah.
But I get what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But like for us as islanders, we already had gender fluidity
Yeah.
before
No.
colonization
100%.
and before Christianity came.
Tongan was my first language.
You fluent?
Yeah, fluent Tongan. Yeah.
Fucking
Pota o pito kule whaka Tonga mas.
Oh!
Hui e mo i for masina.
Remember when Sawa beat Tonga?
So for our audience, you guys see all this stuff, but there's one guy behind the scenes that does it all for us, and it's the big man Yisa. So Yisa, what is it that you do for us, bro?
I do all the filming and I, set up the set and also do all the lighting. And after that, I do all the editing for them and upload it to YouTube and all the reels and everything for Instagram, TikTok and everything else. And yeah, I think the podcast helped me like be confident and more coming from the islands, like more able to learn the language as well and also understand the Australian culture.
I've never been one to really be a social media kind of guy. Never really been in that scene until it all kicked off and we went viral. And now I got a bigger vision now because of Bender Brothers. I get the mixed platter and I started with a double grub meal with the chips. Grab a little sauce, dip that in.
And then you look like that.